to the Fourth Line Podcast Fantasy Show. This is November the 3rd, 2018. With you today is myself, Carl, and back with us again is Ben. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you. Good morning. And can't believe it's already November. We already talked about this a little bit this morning, and most teams actually tonight, 14 games in across. I believe every single team has had played 14 games, if I'm not mistaken, which is damn near a quarter of the way already, it's upsetting.
Yeah, a lot has happened in the NHL perspective to kind of get you going. Anyone who's in their leagues, if you're playing in a weekly or a rotisserie fantasy league, you're in the thick of it, and you kind of at this point know whether your team is good or bad. And so we'll walk you through kind of some of how to save that, what to do if your team's winning, who to believe in, who not to, and look at, as this is Saturday, we're going to look at some of the daily fantasy for tonight to get you up. So let's start there. Let's start with some of the daily fantasy stuff. Ben, you are our DFS expert here. Coming into tonight's games, what is it that you are looking to be doing?
This is a fairly large slate. They're normally around average 10 games, so you get it's the pleasure of getting an extra game. And there's lots of teams that are in excellent positions. We'll talk a little about that, but I just want to go over a little bit of terminology that you might hear that may be foreign to you, or you may have just a little bit of the surface knowledge. I'll be saying things like, there's two different, in regard to our daily fantasy, there's two different game types. You could play your GPPs, which are guaranteed prize pools. In that aspect, you're going to be in tournaments essentially with tons of people. This is when you're going to hear me talk about, or you hear boom or bust percentage. You're looking for those guys with the high volatility that they may give you 0, or they may blow up and give you, say, a goal and assist, which in a GPP goes a long way. There's also cash games. These are your head-to-head double ups, triple ups, or 50-50s. Basically what it is you just, for cash games, you're looking for the steady guys, the guys that are going to get you your 5 to 6 shots on goal. They're averaging, say, a half a point game. So, but this comes with different roster construction throughout both. But yeah, I'll definitely go on when I come down to talking to players. There are some terminologies that I'll be throwing out within this episode, and I'll give it a little bit of description just so it doesn't seem like foreign tongue to anybody going forward. So
for the GPP, when you're in like with the big group of people, how is a winner determined versus in a cash game?
So basically what it is the first prize in GPP, which is you have to have a bang up lineup for that. It's the lottery essentially. So say if let's say the Millie Maker, this is for NFL. You don't really get the big cash or the big prizes in NHL just because of the lack of usership, or the lack of, I guess, users within that specific, I'm going to say genre or sport in this. But in the Millie Maker in the NFL, the top prize is $1 million. It's a $20 buy-in. And then you'll see the pricing once you go from like 2 down to whatever the cutoff is, that's a lot different. In cash games, say if it's a 50-50, you just have to place in the top 50%. So generally what it would be is, say if hypothetically I have a team right now in the NHL single entry $10 double up. What that is your buy-in is $10, but if you're in the top 50% of the placements, you would double up that $10 into $20. So it's the safer bet, but you don't get that volatility of prizing, because you could put together a team that could knock it out of the park, and you could end up making, say, $100 off a $2 buy-in or anything along those lines.
Right. So there you go. So, which one do you usually play? You mentioned that you have one in the double up. What's your go-to?
I used to like the GPPs because you sort of, it gives you a sense of safety, I guess, that you could be like, oh, I could take this player. Like the other night, I took Alex Chase on at a GPP, and his ownership was only 1.2%. So out of those I think it was a 6,500 person GPP, only less than 2% of the people had Chias on his team, and he happened to be the top. I think he was top 5 scoring fantasy for that night. So, and then that's another thing that I'm going to say. I'll say it now. There's 2 terms. It's called fading and chalky. If there's a chalk play, that means you're going to see an ownership of well over 40 to 50%. So say on Thursday night, the chalk play was Mikko Koskinen, the backup goalie for Edmonton. His ownership throughout all the contests I was playing in was well over 30% throughout, which was pretty astounding.
Yeah. So, and that's kind of, and that makes you're looking at, the top players are going to be playing, goaltenders, especially ones that are coming in. He likely had a very low price that night coming in as his first game in the league. So, and hey, got a shutout. So worth the points for everyone who took him that night.
Yeah. And I believe his salary tonight has jumped well over, I think it's $1,100 because he was 71. He was 71 on Thursday. And now he's sitting at a salary of $8,100 against Detroit. But Talbot's also priced at $8,300, which the pricing fluctuates depending on matchup most of the time. And obviously Detroit, not a very offensive team. Well, they've been doing well as of late, but it's interesting when you get down to like below the surface when it comes to roster construction and how these salaries are manipulated and how you can move them around and make your team more flexible.
Yeah, well, let's start with goaltenders for tonight. Which are give me the average lineup. You're starting one goaltender. Give me 2 goalies that we should be looking at tonight. If you're looking to set your lineup, who are you going with?
This is going to be the sense of when in speaking, it's going to be cash games for this particular episode because you can deploy cash. You might not get the highest return because you need that volatility. But my number 1 tonight is Sergei Bobrovsky. Even though they haven't announced starting goalies, I believe he's in the best spot aside from, you could argue, the Edmonton goalies against Detroit. But as of right now, Bobrovsky, he put up a great game on Thursday. He made 44 saves on 45 shots against a Sharks team that has the weapons. Columbus is giving a lot of shots, but they're not exactly scoring chances. And looking at the matchup against LA, which that team hasn't been going. Sure, they got Dustin Brown back, which might elevate their power play a little bit, but they're still sitting at, for their power play, it's 0.14 or 14%, and they're ranked 26th in the league. Their goals a game is 30. They're ranked 31st, and their shots per game is 26th with 28 and a half a game. I think this is an excellent spot. It's just the price tag, I believe, is right on par with most of the middle of the pack goaltenders. He's sitting at $8,100. Another goaltender, I believe this is a bounce back spot for Marc-Andre Fleury against Carolina on Carolina's back-to-back. They also have to, well, it's not much of a travel, but they played last night. Their game was done at, it had to be, I believe it was 10:30. It was a late start in Arizona. And now Carolina has to travel up and go and play Vegas at home, where they've played phenomenal. And this is another great matchup on paper because Fleury, it's Carolina, even though they're shooting the puck a ton. I think they're averaging 36, 37 shots a game, which is ridiculous. But they're just not scoring the goals that they were at the first week or first 2 weeks there. And also 8,200, which is, you can't really go wrong with that. It's a bounce back game. He put up a stinker against St. Louis, and I believe this is a spot where he could sort of turn it around, especially at home.
Yeah, so that was going to be my pick, was Marc-Andre Fleury as a guy to look at, because the salary is reasonable. It's not super cheap. He's up near the top. But Carolina obviously could be putting up, like you said, not as many goals as they have been, and so that would be mine. Bobrovsky, obviously a very good call. From a stay away perspective, obviously I'm staying away from the guys going up against the top teams. So, Carey Price against Nashville. While Price has had a very good year, I'm staying away from him. Pekka Rinne against Boston. I don't fully trust him coming back from that injury yet. We'll see. It is his birthday. He's turned 36 today. So happy birthday to Pekka. But coming back, Boston, not the best of teams. So if you are willing to kind of take that chance on Rinne, that's fine. And then as a value pick, looking down, I want is looking like Halak is going to be getting the start, and he's only coming in at 7,300. But that Nashville team, we saw what they did to Tampa the other night. Obviously, they didn't have, I believe that game did not have Victor Hedman in the lineup, and so, Nashville put 4 goals up on Tampa, who are a top-notch team, and so, I hedge my bets, but that would be someone that I could look at and say, I would be going with as a value pick there.
Yeah, it's a good spot. And when you look at it, the goalies they're pretty evenly priced for the most part. You've got your highest being Martin Jones at 8,400 against Philly, which even that's a great spot considering, but it's that team you're looking at the end of the day, you're looking for that win. You could pull out that win and you might maybe a goal or two against and like 30, 32 saves around there. But for me, it might not be a value to the naked eye, but Andrei Vasilevsky is probable for tonight's game against Montreal in Montreal. Granted, Montreal splits. Here's another. So splits, you'll hear this another term is they have home and away splits. So there's a stat. You can filter stats based on a team or player's performance based in home games or away games. Montreal actually is a little bit stronger at home, but then it can be a bounce back game. It's a big thing in hockey where you're playing within conference and you have a goalie who just came off. I wouldn't say it was a bad game. It wasn't a great game. It's just, I believe the Lightning should have won that game with 47 shots or whatever. And Pekka Rinne basically stole that game. He stole that game completely. And Vasilevsky at 7,700, you could consider him value considering most goalies are sitting around the 8,000, 8,200 mark.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's head to, let's work our way up towards the centers, defenseman. I'm looking at, this stack comes courtesy of Nick, friend of the show, who informed me that since the Detroit Red Wings last lost their game, Mark Giordano leads the league in points. And so I'm looking at that, and he is an expensive defenseman today, but he's also playing a Chicago team that's going to give up some goals. And so I'm going with Mark Giordano as my first defenseman that I'm picking for this team.
See, this is, I can't justify overpaying for a defenseman, but if I'm going to, you're completely right. It's either going to be Chris Letang at 6,400 against Toronto or Mark Giordano at 6,500 against Chicago. For me, I take more of a value approach for when I'm picking my defenseman. So I sort of gave the two that if I wanted to pay up, if my salary and my roster construction allowed me to, I would. But the two defensemen I'm looking for they're way down there. Colton Parayko at 4,400 against Minnesota. I think St. Louis's defense core has been, you don't really know who's going to show up in the sense that you have Alex Pietrangelo, Vince Dunn, Joel Edmondson, and Parayko. And you could throw Bouwmeester and Butler in there, and they're sort of get a hodgepodge of a great hockey defense core, but a very uncertain and volatile fantasy defense. You don't really know which one is going to be deployed. They have the offense figured out. It's just once you have Pietrangelo there, it sort of throws a wrench in the fact that you don't know who's going to be that guy. But with Parayko, he's averaging, as of this season, he's averaging 3.0 DraftKings fantasy points, which is great. The thing that I really like about him is through 11 games this season, he has 20 block shots. Block shots is another thing that's scored in daily fantasy, which is really foreign to people, but it is one of those categories that guys make a living off of just taking these cheap defensemen. Could potentially like Chris Russells or like Brandon Carlo the one year I remember, or even this season I picked him up and he had 7 block shots in a game, which is good enough for 3.5 points. And just above him at 4,800, Jeff Petrie. I don't think Montreal is going to win this game, but the fact that he's logging his career high in 24, he's averaging 24, I believe 24 and a little bit minutes per game, which is unbelievable. And without Shea Weber, you need a power play defenseman. And Petrie's their 4-on-4 guy, their 5-on-5 guy, and their power play guy, and penalty kill, I do believe. So he's going to get block shots. He's going to get shots. He's racked up just under 20, which is fairly good for a guy who's not exposed to be an elite defenseman, but he's filling that void of Shea Weber quite well.
Yeah, well, and actually, so my just to quickly go off that, my defenseman that I would be taking to fill out this roster tonight is Colton Parayko as well. So if I was to go somewhere else, just to give the listeners someone else to kind of look at on a value pick sort of a perspective, I would probably lean towards somewhere in the realm of I might go Chara. He's coming in at 3,900. So that's a little bit cheaper, 500 less than what I'd be paying for Parayko, which would give me some more for the front end. I also could be convinced looking at Gudas and Vlasic there as well. Travis Hamonic with Calgary as well. If you want to go with a stack, which I'm not a huge fan of, but I know that that's fine. So pair him with Gio, and I'd have a pricey pick and an expensive one in Calgary.
Yeah, you can even go, I believe, Brody. That's everybody thought I was personally sold on, and I thought Brody was going to be sort of revitalized once they announced that they were going to reunite him with Giordano, but it seems you always get that back and forth where it may sound good from a fantasy perspective, but it's not. You sort of get it's filtered to the one player, and Gio is definitely benefiting from that. Like, it's great from a hockey sense because those two are great on the ice, but it's hard to. But Hamonic, yes, that's one place I'd go, or even Noah Hannafin. You could even go a cheaper price. He's at 3,600. It's just out of the top 4 there, he sort of gets the least of the ice time, I do believe. Could be just he came over with the trade with Elias Lindholm, so it's a little bit different. If there was one more I was looking at that could be, where is it? I'm probably going to butcher his name, but at 3,800, Marcus Nudavara. No, that's actually not too bad.
Yeah, I was going to say that sounds pretty accurate to me.
Yeah, and at 3,800, he's been pretty hot. Like, he's only averaging 20 minutes a game, but over his last 10 games, he's averaging just under 3 points of that DraftKings points, which is great. But at the same time, he's only getting 18 minutes of ice time, that's the big thing when you're drafting these defensemen, is you want them to be on the ice for all purposes, not just a power play defenseman. If you're picking just based off power play defensemen, you're going to pay a steep price, just because it does come with the goal potential, assist potential, and shot potential.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's go to the wing, and we're filling 3 spots there. And the first one I'm going with is a guy who's been pretty good since he's come back from his injury, and that's Alex Tuch. He's only played 5 games so far this year, but he's got a point per game so far, clocking in 5.3 for DraftKings. And that's a guy who's still reasonably priced. He's coming in today at 5,800, and his price continues to go up as the season goes. And so that's my first pick. I'm looking at Alex Tuch with the Golden Knights.
I like that pick, despite the opponent rank being like Carolina being 9th. We touched on it already with Marc-Andre Fleury. This is their second game of a back-to-back, playing on the West Coast, and they didn't exactly play. They played an extended game, a game that went into overtime. It'll be interesting to see who Carolina starts in that. As of right now, what they have on the depth chart is they have Scott Darling starting, which I believe of the three goalies is the best goalie. However, you're basically playing a backup regardless of who you deploy out in Carolina. I'm staying within the Carolina Golden Knight game here. I'm looking at, instead of looking at Tuck, I'm looking at Eric Howe for 4,500. This has been a guy that I believe has been already underperforming. He does play on Howla's wing, or he plays center on Howla's line. So that very well you could look at that as being a stack if you're confident in looking in that Vegas Golden Knights game against Carolina there. It's going to be high scoring. But for my first pick, it's more of a value play. I would consider it a value play in the cash game sense. JT Miller. So they reunited the Miller, Kucherov, and Stamkos line late in the Nashville game. Miller's been playing due to the skewing through power play. He's averaging only 15 minutes of time on ice, but the last 3 games he's been averaging 18 and a half. This is great, and at 4,900, less than 5K, you can't really go wrong with him.
Yeah, that was going to be my next pick as well. With him being reunited, sure, Carey Price likely to be in net for the Canadiens tonight. However, that line has potential to go off against anyone, any night when you have that combination. So, looking at, and it's confirmed that Price is in net there for the Canadiens. So, but I'm still going JT Miller there. My third pick that I'm going to be tossing out is Nick Foligno against the Los Angeles Kings. Now it is in LA, so it is on the road. But it is against the now terrible Los Angeles Kings. Jack Campbell likely to be in net there for them. And that's a team that no matter what happens, they can put it up. But Foligno has 8 points so far on the season and just consistent production. He's not going to light it up. Obviously he had 3 points that first game, but he's averaging about a point every other game. And that's what I like to see. So consistent. He does other things, right? He's getting his shots still. He can take some face-offs every now and again. And so that's a guy. He's not getting much production at the power play. But then again, anything can change with just the one game. So that's who I'm looking at as my third pick, Nick Foligno. He's only coming in at 4,300. So he is my most value pick on this lineup.
Yeah. And I believe the Columbus LA game has a hotbed of lots of value plays. You can look on both sides. However, Columbus, I would say, just like with the same mentality, is attack arguably the worst team in NHL. I would say through most metrics that they are close to the very bottom if you were to put them all together, being the worst team in NHL. And this bodes well for daily fantasy because Columbus, their most expensive player, this shouldn't come as a surprise, is Panarin, coming in at 6,600. I believe he's going to be really chalky. Between him and Cam Atkinson, I believe you'll see in any given contest, they'll probably carry an ownership of the minimum of 15 to 20%, maybe even more. And I believe Bobrovsky might actually be chalky. But then again, I believe you might see people avoid Bobrovsky just because he has put up a few stinkers. But to continue, I actually have, this will sort of tie into when we touch on centers. I've got Josh Anderson he's at 5,300, and also Pierre-Luc Dubois as one of my centers who comes in at 5,000, which completely blows my mind considering he does play alongside Panarin and Cam Atkinson on the first line and first power play unit. But I'm going to touch a little bit on Anderson. Josh Anderson, he's only averaging 15 minutes of ice time. Last season, he was deployed. He was a first line mainstay for most of the season. It's not necessarily that he has 7 goals this year, which isn't really a surprise considering I think he finished with like almost 30 goals last year in under 70 games, which is pretty strong. but it's his two-way play. It's another guy that's going to get you your block shots. He plays most of his time when needed on the penalty kill, and he already has one shorthanded goal, and he's shooting the puck a lot despite the lack of ice time. He has 37 shots, and through those 12 games, it's 14.5 time on ice per game, which is good, and it equates to 3.8, just under 4 drafting points per game over those 12 games.
There you go. So my center, moving over to that position, my first pick is Brayden Schenn. He's coming in at 5,300 for tonight's game. And in 11 games so far this year, 3 goals, 6 assists for him, playing in the center position. He normally gets, a number of, gets you some face-offs. Not obviously as a forward, not a ton of blocks there, but consistent shooting. And that's what I like to see. Because if you're looking for, in a game like this, where I'm wanting something steady, I just need to get in that top 50% if I'm playing in a cash game. I want a guy who's getting his shots, because I like to think that if you're getting your shot, it's true. If you're getting your shots, eventually the goals will come, the production will come. I want to look at that larger sample size to see how you're performing, and that is him. He has had a shot in every game so far this season, except for the opener. So, shots except for the second game of the season. So, shots in 9 in a row, and that's a guy that I'm taking is Brayden Schenn against the Minnesota Wild, who, they've done a little bit better of late, but certainly haven't shown the full talent over the course of the season.
Yeah, that's a very good pick. And you could either slide up and pick up Ryan O'Reilly, or slide down take Schenn, which I believe is a safer pick considering. And it's their power play has been awesome. It's unfortunate that O'Reilly he cuts into that market share of power play time, which lots of people can see as it sort of hinders Brayden Schenn's value, but it's priced accordingly. That's why he is beneath Ryan O'Reilly. But at the same time, I believe they're on an even playing field. And against Minnesota, it's hard to tell. They're middle of the pack at 16th against opposing centers, but you've seen Minnesota collapse, and then sometimes they come out as a defensive powerhouse. It's hard to say which Minnesota you're going to see, but I believe St. Louis will win this game, and it'll come off special teams, which is where both Schenn and Ryan O'Reilly excel. I'm going to pull up a few centers here that's there. I believe Nazem Kadri. I can't believe we haven't touched on this, but with the Matthews injury, there's going to have to be some replacements. Tavares and Kadri are both in excellent spots. Granted that there's a little bit of meshing, but they did so well out the gates with the lineups that they've got, with the players that they have. All they had to do is shuffle Matthews out and Tavares or Kadri. And I would say if you're really willing to look at it, 5,800 for Nazem Kadri is an excellent spot against Pittsburgh, who have struggled to keep the puck out of their net, given the last 2 games against the Islanders. And I believe Toronto is twice the team as the Islanders are. So this on paper, the matchup isn't great, but in fantasy perspective, this could be the high scoring game of the night.
Yeah, well, and this is obviously the high sticking game of the night. So if you head to the Fourth Line Podcast Twitter at Fourth Line Podcast, you can play high sticking there, and that costs you nothing. You're entering these DFS leagues. Head over there and you can pick what you think the score is going to be, and we'll give you some points, and there's prizes from that. So, I'm torn with that game. Cause I agree. I like Kadri in that game and that matchup because he is moving up, but hasn't shown that production yet. So, when that production does come, he'll be able to come in at a value. And Toronto and Pittsburgh, you mentioned Pittsburgh just lost. They got swept on a home and home with the Islanders. Toronto losing against Dallas, losing against Calgary. And I would say Dallas-Calgary is a much tougher matchup than Islanders-Islanders.
Yeah.
So, I would lean towards Toronto as the favorite in that game. But agreed. The only downside, Toronto's offense has looked, well, it hasn't looked stagnant. It has been stagnant, right? They scored 1 goal in each of those 2 games. And so there's a part of it that is the missing of Matthews and trying to get those lines back together. And so from that perspective, I personally am staying away from that game, but if and when Kadri does hit, that'll be a very, very good value pick there. So I've got 2 more spots left in my lineup. I don't know about yourself, what you're looking at. I'm looking here, and part of me wants to go and tell me your thoughts on this. You can talk me out of what could be a terrible decision. So I have Marc-Andre Fleury in as my pick, but I'm also loving the production and honestly the value of Sebastian Aho so far this season. 13 points in 17 games, coming in at 4.6 fantasy points a game, 6,300, but against my goaltender in Marc-Andre Fleury. Should I or should I not do that?
That's an actual excellent question. It's similar to starting like a heavy stack against what your daily fantasy defense would be in football, but with the amount of shots that Carolina shoots, most of you see any given game, the guys like Justin Falk, Slavin, and Dougie Hamilton, they're all averaging 3, 4, 5 shots a game, which is absolutely absurd from the blue line, having 3 defensemen with 5+ shots. And that's where you're going to get most of your production via Marc-Andre Fleury is these outside shots. Granted that Carolina seems to always be playing from behind. So they're shooting the puck more. And at 0.2 a save last night, Antti Raanta, he probably made, let's say, 25 saves from well over 20 feet out, which is absolutely, they're not, on an NHL caliber goalies, those aren't going to be goals unless they bounce around and they're seeing eye shot or something like that. So even that, I believe that could be a good situation. Would I go with it? In this sense, if I were to go with it, I'd probably drop down and maybe find someone that may be a little bit cheaper that you're comfortable slotting in, potentially someone like Jordan Staal, who's going to, I believe he plays second line penalty kill. So you get that production from block shots, and who knows, you might get the odd shorthanded point. But I wouldn't want to elevate or climb the ladder and go towards Aho, especially in a cash game, just because he's more offensive. He doesn't really give you that multi-category coverage that you would get with a cheaper guy like Jordan Staal.
Well, there you go. So there you go. I'll go Jordan Staal with that pick. And then I still have to round out my lineup. I decided the wise choice of just making my lineup as we talk through this. So I have sitting here $6,000 left to fill my final spot, which, there's a ton of very good players that you can get. It's only about 20 or so that you can. So right around that $6,000 range. One matchup that I greatly enjoy, and now that I see where I'm sitting at, I might skew things around a bit because I wanted someone from San Jose. I wanted to be able to have that because playing against the Flyers, that is a team with Brian Elliott likely starting tonight. That's San Jose is going to be able to put up some points. And looking at that, I've got Joe Pavelski sitting at 5,900. Evander Kane at 5,600, or if I wanted to swap out Colin Parayko, I could put Erik Karlsson in there for 5,900, so or 6,000. So those are my picks that I'm looking at. I don't want to put a defenseman in my utility spot, so if I am going Karlsson, I'd swap out Parayko, or even Giordano. Maybe I'd move out Gio, put in Karlsson, and then that would let me spend a little bit more on that util spot.
Yeah, you can even, because the Calgary forwards they're not a bad play for this afternoon. And you have a wide variety of choices. Like you could either go Monahan, you could move over to the wing for Kachuk or Lindholm. And even Backlund, their top 6 have been playing pretty good. Granted that I don't understand why they don't show up for any other period other than third, but from a fantasy, it doesn't really matter to me when they get their goals as long as they get them.
As a fan of the Avalanche who was at that game this year, it 100% matters to me that they only show up for third period. So,
yeah, and around that 6,000 spot, another recommendation I could say is Thomas Hertl would be an excellent spot. I believe he's their Swiss Army knife. He's a power play guy, even strength guy, penalty kill guy. A season-long fantasy, he is a stud, and I've tried throughout the whole year already. Like, I managed one out of 5 leagues that I bear the same fantasy hockey name. I've been able to get Hurdle. But yeah, Hurdle would be excellent. I think this is his spot to bounce back. Like, he only has 7 assists, and that he had better production in a less talented Ottawa squad. Granted, you get the familiarity and you're there, but he just hasn't produced. They were saying he was going to be the guy to beat out Brent Burns or be the better defenseman statistically, but he just hasn't showed it. And I believe this could be a great night for him if he were to show up.
Well, there you go. Let's quickly, any more things on DFS that you want to touch on before we quickly, I wanted to touch on some of the guys that are, kind of some of the stars that are over or underperforming for your draft leagues, your weekly leagues.
Yeah, sure. There's been a ton. Actually, for most of my leagues, I took Jamie Benn. Some of them were in the top 5 picks, some were late in the first, and there's been a couple leagues that's been the biggest question mark. I was sort of worried about the Jets because it took them basically up until this Finland trip to wake up and start seeing production, and that's through and through. That's from Patrick Laine, Mark Scheifele, Blake Wheeler. It was very alarming that Nikolai Ehlers just got his first goal in 62 games or something absurd like that. Like, he playing alongside, granted he has Brian Little centering that second line, and Nikolai Ehlers bounced from the 4th line to the 3rd to the 2nd, and basically everywhere in between. But that whole team, from a fantasy perspective, was kind of scary at the beginning of the year, considering lots of people were so high on them.
Yeah. Well, and that is very true. We saw Patrick Laine now looks respectable, right? If you are a Patrick Laine owner, you come in and you suddenly, things are looking okay for you. You know, he had 3 goals in the 2 games in Finland. And so that's, 4 goals. He had a hat trick the first game and then 1 more, in the second. And so things are obviously looking up for him, but a lot of that production coming through the power play. He has 9 goals on the season, 7 of them coming on the power play, still yet to get a whole lot 5-on-5. And we've seen that with his usage, right? He's been moved up and down that lineup. He's played on the 3rd line, the 1st line. And so we will see when he can get that, regular or even strength production coming, because that'll be the big tell for him. But obviously not an incredibly disappointing start. What I wanted to touch on, and we talked about this team in setting our DFS lineups, but Tampa Bay, that top line with Stamkos, Kucherov, having JT Miller move up onto that line, that's a line that a lot was expected of this season, as it should have been. They were the highest producing team last year, and coming in, not a whole lot happening for this team. You know, consistent, but not a lot. And off the start, they had very few games to start the season. And so you could excuse it from that point of view. But we're coming in here and, they've played 12 games so far. Kucherov, a point a game, not to be disappointed in. Stamkos, 8 points in 12 games for him. Are you worried about this line, or is this just something that in due time they will get their production back? It blows my mind why JT Miller didn't start the season on the top line. And that was the big thing. They had great success. He was a very, very quiet, but very underappreciated fantasy performer after the trade deadline last year. And I believe when you're playing in the shadow, and in fantasy, names go a long way. We spoke about this on a different episode. You look Stamkos, Kucherov. Lots of people probably don't even know who JT Miller is when you mix that melting pot of superstardom down in Tampa Bay together. And JT Miller he still got that production in the 12 games. He has 3 goals and 7 assists, 5 power play points, which is obviously you're gonna get to reap the benefits of playing with Kucherov and Stamkos. But from a fantasy perspective, I believe, as long as they keep this line together, sure, they're going to excel, but that's the problem.
you can't really applying NHL actual hockey sense to fantasy. Sometimes it just doesn't make sense how you could have a guy that was a first liner on another team and now you're going to bury him on the fourth line. I believe they should just stick it out. They're going to have some hiccups. They are the best team that I would say in the NHL fantasy, both fantasy and actual hockey sense.
Yeah. And let's look at defensemen here. San Jose got off to a slow start, went on the road, and to me, it took some time to get used to that. Erik Karlsson came into camp very late after the trade, and you could see that they weren't a cohesive unit at this point yet. And it kind of trickled throughout the whole lineup, right? Joe Thornton was out, Erik Karlsson wasn't settled in yet, and people were still getting used to it. And now you watch this team, and you can see why everyone had them as the favorite to come out of the West once that trade happened, right? The team on paper started to become that in their play. And so these are guys that I'm looking at, and if I can pick them up, you mentioned Thomas Hertl. He's one that I think everyone I know if you have him, you are happy with his production so far this year. But if you drafted Erik Karlsson, who you probably took higher than you needed to, you're disappointed in him, right? You're disappointed. You wanted higher than what you're getting because you probably took him in the second round, and not second round production from him so far this year. So, that's a guy that if someone's willing to do that and is getting a little antsy, same thing. Victor Hedman hurt in Tampa. If you can get someone to panic from the IR designation next to his name, same thing with Austin Matthews in Toronto. These are guys that their production is dropping, but if you have a good enough team around you and you can build it to get you into the playoffs, that's what I'm looking for. So, depending on the rest of your matchup and obviously the cost on it, you're not going to be trading Austin Matthews, who was a first round pick, first or second. You're not trading that much value. So you'll be able to get him at a discount. And there's no reason to believe that when he comes back, production will be less, because we saw last year when he came back from an injury, a similar shoulder injury, was the other shoulder, obviously. But when he came back, he produced very similarly to what he was doing before. No reason to believe that he's going to be slowed down by this.
Yeah, and I'm guilty, one of those guilty people of taking Karlsson extremely high in one of the deeper leagues. But at the same time, I took an approach of drafting defensemen who have that high ceiling, but don't necessarily have that lower end, like the low floor. And I'm honestly paying for it. And as of right now, to get someone back for what I believe is Karlsson's pretty borderline, pretty average value is difficult, because everybody sees the fact that he's -10. Yeah. And the fact that he's not in the top percentile for any statistical category across any defenseman. You have guys like Robert Hagg and Colton Parayko, Vince Dunn, who are statistically ranked a lot higher than Erik Karlsson, and those guys, lots of those guys went undrafted.
Yeah, for sure. And, lots of guys who weren't expected to be performing the way that they are, who are doing incredibly well to start the season. One of them, guy, we've mentioned him already this show, but Michael Ferland has had a coming out party in Carolina, and a lot of it is because of his line and the usage that he's had there. Obviously, when you're playing on the top unit and Sebastian Aho is your center, and he has shown that he is a top player in the league, but 11 points so far this season, 7 goals for Michael Ferland. He is one that if I would be selling high on him, because certainly you will enjoy this production as much as possible, but he, to me, would need to stay on that line, stay with Aho, to be able to keep that up.
Yeah, and he's a great multi-cat player too. And like you said, that team, they don't really play much defense. They're just, every chance they get, they're putting pucks on net. Well, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But yeah, he's going to get you your hits. And then if you play in a league and with penalty minutes, you're going to get that as well. The only downside, granted, it's only single category, is plus minus. I know some leagues don't play with it, some play with it, but you can generally find a defenseman who from waivers that'll get you your 30 points a year, or maybe 20 points a year, but go plus 20. Look at Char the last couple of years. It's absolutely ridiculous, the plus minuses he puts up. But two of the guys that had like similar stories, Kasperi Kapanen and Zach Hyman. Even though they are playing on Austin Matthews' Leafs, Zach Hyman's still a mainstay on that first line that they see. I believe it's Tavares, Kapanen, or Hyman, and Marner. And then you're seeing your Johansson, Kapanen, and Kadri for your second line. They're both top six players. I believe it might take a game or two to mesh and get going on with life without Matthews for the time being. But those two could be buy low candidates as of right now, just because lots of people, like you mentioned, are freaking out that the Leafs don't have an Austin Matthews anymore.
Yeah, well, and so currently Marleau is on the left side of that second line. But I agree, if you can get one of them, especially everyone seems to forget that the Leafs are still top 10 in the league. I believe they have the second highest regulation overtime wins. And so I look at that Leafs team, I'm like, yeah, like let's not worry. This team is still good. This is the team that a month ago everyone was saying was going to win the cup, and you lose that. One move that I have made is I did in two leagues that have IR plus spots. I'm in two, and in both of those I have William Nylander on that IR plus spot, because thanks to Yahoo, they just labeled him as out, not NA, which is nice, because then I can stash him there. It doesn't burn a roster spot for me. And so from that angle, that's a guy that I have. And if you are in a league and the person who owns William Nylander does not have him on an IR plus spot, and you can put him there, that's someone that I would maybe offer to take off someone's hands and do them a favor of freeing up that spot, because he will be playing, whether it's in Toronto, whether it's in Carolina. There's a lot of talk of trade happening there. By December 1st, within the next month, William Nylander will be playing hockey. He is not going to be sitting out this season. So somewhere he will be playing, and you want to be the one picking him up and having him for the second half of the season.
Oh, and that's the thing. And like you said, you have these people who are just don't have the patience, and they want to get something in return for something that they believe is useless. But like you said, he will be playing hockey, and no matter where you put him, granted, it may take a little bit to learn the system and get his legs back underneath him, but he's probably like any other athlete. They don't, even though they're sitting, they'll be game ready. Same thing goes with Tom Wilson. This is an excellent time to sort of test the waters and see if you could obtain Wilson. He's a multi-category guy. Like if you play in a banger league, of course, he's the cream of the crop if you're in the sense. But Jacob, like even with Jacob Vrana filling that void and doing a pretty good job with that Kuznetsov and Ovi line, I believe Wilson will get maybe a couple games of getting his bearings back and his wheels or his legs underneath him. But you could probably get him for cheap, and lots of people are going to be willing to sell low, especially if they need to win their week or they need to sort of improve their roster. It's a good target if you need a right winger. Well,
and only owned in 23% of Yahoo leagues, so it is very likely that Tom Wilson is sitting on the waiver wire for you. You can head out there and pick him up. So if you have spots, if you are a team struggling, if you're looking to replace someone who's injured, that's a league. If somehow he's sitting there in a deep league, I'm in a fairly deep league that he is actually unowned right now. So this is, that's a good guy to pick up, because depending on usage, that's a guy who, very usage dependent. If he goes back on that line with Ovechkin, he's going to get production.
Yeah. And it's just having those situations, like which players, there's plenty of players that are they're taking advantage of a situation that in like, Jason Pominville playing on the first line in Buffalo. Like, it's weird to think that Buffalo is doing as well as they are. It's actually mind-boggling to see the fact that most of the players have a positive plus minus for the first time in how many years? I think they just they had their first 4-game win streak in long, but irregardless, it's you just have to find these guys that the streaming options that you could slot in your lineup for potentially a week that they have 5 or 6 games and just roll with it. And Jason Pominville, if you manage to get him before the 20th of October and rode that wave, you saw massive dividends paying out just from picking up a simple player.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we wrap up the show, just one last thing of note. If you came for the DFS talk and then left, this is not going to help you, but Colton Parayko missed the morning skate. He's sick. And so stay tuned for that if you do have him in your lineup. As both of us were big fans of Mr. Parayko, stay tuned if he is a game time decision. So we'll see how he is. It looks like he's got a bit of the flu there. And so if you are, that's a value pick gone. But obviously, we talked about the guys in Calgary. Those could be a good replacement for him in your lineup.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of DFS is that you could plug and play throughout any position. And it gives you that flexibility. It's a lot of fun. You just have to go and try daily fantasy. Lots of people are sort of scared of it, but you could play your free tournaments, you could play your free cash games, just get the feel for it. But it's a whole different ball game than season long, and it adds a sort of a fun twist to it. Absolutely.
Well, we will be back here. We're going to try to do this a little bit more frequently than we have been, obviously. We started at the start of the year and then went for a month without. So we're not going to make any promises that our schedules can't cash, but we'll try to bring you a little bit more consistent fantasy hockey here at the Fourth Line Podcast. If you can head over to our Twitter at Fourth Line Podcast, you can find Ben. Ben, what's your Twitter handle at?
It's WCS_BFerg.
There you go. So you can find Ben over there. Lots of great stuff happening on his account. You can find, some recommendations. If we, for Saturday games, we'll be here. But for the other big days, some DFS talk with Ben over on the Twitter. If you have any questions, you can send it to both of us. And we will kind of, let you know our thoughts for what that's worth. Until next week, you can find us on Twitter at Fourth Line Podcast, Facebook.com/The Fourth Line Podcast, and thefourthlinepodcast.com. Until next week, we'll see you later.
Thank you. Have a good one.